Boys and girls, thank you for joining me today. My name is Mrs. Duff, and I teach kindergarten at Sequoyah School. I have lots of friends that I've been Skyping with, and we've been having Zoom meetings with your teachers, with Miss Partizana and Miss Gideon and Miss Oliver, and I've talked to Mrs. Saul, and I've seen all kinds of wonderful things on Miss Carter's dojo page. I just want to let you know that we are missing our students so much, but I'm glad that you could join me today. Boys and girls, before we get started, I just want you to know that you might want something at the end of this to write with. So if you have some kind of paper, maybe just a spiral notebook, or if you have any kind of paper around your house, old mail, anything will work. You'll just need to make sure that it's plain on the back so you can draw a really nice picture when we're finished. I have a lot of words up here, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. But before I do that, have you missed me? Have you missed your teachers? We have missed you so much. As a matter of fact, one of my students, Cassie, comes by every morning and gives me a hug. For 4 weeks, I haven't gotten a hug from Cassie. And this morning, her mama sent me a message that she is so excited to see me. So I just want everybody to stand up right now. All of you stand up. And I want you to reach your arms out way big and give yourself a big hug. And think that's either from one of your friends or your favorite teacher. Maybe you're hugging somebody you haven't seen in a while. Oh, that was a good hug. Thank you. I could feel your hugs from here. I promise. Many of you give the best hugs out there. Oh, I feel so much better now because, I've never had to teach on TV. This is my first time. And I just want you to know that I was thinking about what we were going to do today. Well, free time with Mrs. Duff. That's what my sign says. I'm not going to read you a book, though, because a lot of us have books at home, or you guys have gotten to read books on the internet. Maybe your teacher has sent out all kinds of websites for you to go to and read books and have books read to you, and you might find them anywhere on the internet, or maybe you've borrowed some from the library and you still got those, and hang on to those library books because your librarian's going to want it back when you get back to school. So I just want you to know that when I was a little girl, I had a favorite book. We all do. We all have a favorite book. My favorite book was The Best Nest. And my mom would read it to me probably more times than she wanted to. And I knew every word in that book. I knew that story from front to back. Well, it's about a pair of birds that build a nest. It's written by Mr. P.D. Eastman. He also wrote some other good books about birds, like Are You My Mother? That's another one. And he wrote a lot of books about animals. And a lot of books are about animals because animals are something we know about and we see a lot. Well, yesterday when I was out in my backyard and I was looking around doing some yard work because it was a beautiful day, and then this morning I got up and it was cold again and my feet were cold on the way here. And I was outside working and I noticed there were a lot of trees in my backyard. There was a great big tall tree that's been there for years and years and years and years. It's probably older than me. There are some little bitty tiny trees that Mr. Duff planted. I don't plant trees, but he did a few years ago, and they're only just about that tall. Maybe about as tall as some of you, but they're not tall. And then there's trees that are in the middle. They're trees that are just starting to grow, just starting to get big enough for things to live in them. But the trees that most of the things live in, like the birds and the squirrels, and the things that mice might live in, the trees that mice might live in, those are usually pretty big trees, like great, big, huge trees, not tiny trees. Because if you put a nest full of eggs in a tiny tree, what's it going to do? It's just going to go whoop and fall down. All those branches are just going to go everywhere. Well, yesterday I was thinking, because I was picking up all these limbs out of my yard, and I thought, what if a bird lost its home? What if a bird had a favorite tree to live in, and then all of a sudden she couldn't live in that tree anymore? Well, I'm not going to read you a book about a bird in a tree, because I told you I like this book, but when I was little, I always tried to think of maybe what those birds were doing another time. I'm not going to pick up a book and just read the words out of there. I'm going to tell you a story about a bird and the tree she lived in, and some other animals that also lived in and around that tree. Well, I've got some words that we're going to use in our story, and every once in a while I might point to one of those words, but we're going to read them together right now. Can you read these words with me? Oh, you can? I know, Jackson, I know you can read these words with me. So we've got bird. What's that one? Bee, right. Can we think of a word that rhymes with bee? Yes, knee. Tree. Oh, I'm hearing all kinds of words that rhyme with bee. Worm. Grass. Egg. Can we think of a word that rhymes with egg? Leg. Good one. Oh my goodness. You guys give yourselves a brain kiss. You are brilliant children. Stick. What? Oh, that's a long word for some of my kindergartners and pre-K students. Oh, I know. You first graders, you second graders, you can read that word. Squirrel. Tree. Oh, wait, that rhymes with another word we just said. Bee. Turtle. That's right. Man, that was another big word. Pest. Owl. Nest. Mice. And my favorite one, because I was born in July. So who else was born in July? That many of you were born in July? Well, I have a friend that was in my class this year that was born on my exact same birthday. We were birthday buddies. Cecilia, if you're watching, happy early birthday, July 19th. Sun. And can we think of a word that rhymes with sun? We usually eat our favorite foods on them. Bun. That's right. That's right. Yes. We eat our hot dogs and we eat our burgers on buns. So we're going to use these words. And when I get to these words in the story, if I remember, you might have to remind me. If I remember, I'll point to that word. But guess what? I kind of have an old brain, a lot older than yours. So your brain works a lot faster than mine. So I might skip over a word and I might say tree 15 times and I'm not going to go tree, tree. But think about it. And when I listen to somebody tell me something, I also like to write all the words down, or I like to kind of doodle and draw pictures. If you want to do that while I'm telling this story, that would be wonderful. But if you want to just listen to the story and maybe hug one of your stuffed animals or love on your Simba, if you have a Simba at home. I have a Simba. I love my Simba. Simba went home with me the other day and got a bath. He's so handsome. Marilyn, Simba is missing you also, as well as the other students in my classroom. Now, I'm going to point to those words, and I want you, if you're drawing a picture, you can write these words. If you don't want to write these words, that's perfectly fine. Now, yesterday also, I got something from Miss Carter, and it was about some baby birds that were in a birdhouse. Now, that birdhouse had baby birds in it. It was a little nest down in there, so it wasn't in a tree. So not all birds grow up and put their eggs in a tree. Sometimes they put them in a birdhouse, sometimes they'll be on the ground. But if you see a nest, don't ever disturb it. Are we ready for our story? I'm ready for our story. Oh my goodness. Once upon a time, there was this beautiful bird. Her name was Mrs. Bird. Now, if she was my bird, I know what color I would make my bird. But your bird can be any color, because remember, we're using our imagination. We're making up our own story. So Mrs. Bird lived in the biggest, tallest, highest tree in the middle of the Smith's yard. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they tended around their yard, and they had a big field of grass that was next to their yard, and there was even a little pond that was on the other side, and there were lots of animals that lived in and around the tree. Mrs. Bird loved her tree. She woke up, and the squirrels that lived underneath the tree in some holes, they ran up and down the tree and up and down the tree. Sometimes they were a little bit annoying, but she never told them that because she was a really good friend. She just tried to ignore them and move on with her day. And the best part about the squirrels living there is every time they found an acorn, they would dig a hole to bury it under the tree. And a lot of the times when they dug those holes, guess what came out of those holes? No, not spiders. Well, sometimes spiders. And the birds like teeth spiders. No. Not moles. Those would be too big. Worms, that's right. Worms would come up out of those holes, and Mrs. Bird would swoop down, grab those worms, take them right back up to her nest, chew them up, and feed them to her baby birds. Well, her baby birds had all grown up, and her nest was empty. And Mrs. Bird decided she was going to do some work on her nest. She was going to work on putting some new straw in there, and she decided to leave her nest one day and go out and collect some straw. So she flew to the grass next door, and she found some straw, and she found some tall grass that was kind of dry that she knew would be really nice, kind of like a bed for her next set of baby birds when she laid some more eggs in her nest. And she said hi to those field mice that came over and visited every once in a while. She stopped by Mr. Turtle, who lived by the pond, and he was really her best friend. And every once in a while, she and Mr. Turtle would just stop and have a visit. She stopped and said good morning to Mr. Turtle and went on. She flew to the grove of trees at the neighbor's house. The neighbors had these wonderful fruit trees. They were big, and they had all kinds of yummy apples and plums growing in them, and she loved to go over there because there were all kinds of things in that group of trees. Well, Mrs. Bird got over there, and she almost went right back to her own tree because she got scared of a bee. That's right, she got scared of a bee. Well, over in that grove, there weren't a lot of squirrels, but there were some pests like the bees. And she knew that she didn't like being around all those pests. Well, later on that afternoon, after she gathered all of her sticks, oh, there's the word stick. She gathered all of her sticks and all of the grass that she needed for her nest, to get her nest ready for her next group of eggs. Mrs. Bird flew back to her tree. But guess what? It was very loud. All she could hear was this extremely annoying, buzzing sound. And it was just so annoying. And it just sounded like all these little wings flapping. Mrs. Bird had very delicate ears. So she took her wings and she covered up her ears. And she was just, she just couldn't even get that sound out of her head. She just kept thinking about it. She put the grass, she started to put all the things that she had brought back in her nest. Where's my word nest? There it is, nest. In her nest, and she was enjoying the sun. But all of a sudden, she saw all of the field mice run out of the grass as fast as they could. And those field mice, they ate a lot, and they were kind of fat, and they were pretty lazy. And guess what? It didn't matter. They ran so fast, even though they had eaten all that grass this morning and they were hanging out, enjoying their time in the sun. It didn't matter. Those mice ran super fast, faster than any cat would ever be able to catch them. We're so glad about that. And the squirrels, she couldn't find the squirrels, but that sound, bzzz, just kept going off in her head. Finally, Mrs. Bird went down to ask Mr. Turtle what the sound was all about. And she looked at the field of grass, and guess what? The grass had all these little bitty bugs, eating it all the way to the ground. And then she looked up at her tree. And guess what? all of her big, beautiful leaves were being eaten by these bugs, these creatures she had never seen before. So she asked Mr. Turtle, Mr. Turtle, do you know why there's all that sound coming from the field next door and why my tree looks like its leaves are getting eaten up? Mr. Turtle sat there. He had his head in his shell, tucked in tight, sitting as quiet as he could be. He didn't hear Mrs. Bird. The noise was so loud. And after all, Mr. Turtle was pretty old. He'd lived there on the pond for a long time. And Mr. Turtle he didn't have very good hearing. Have you ever met those people that are hard of hearing? And every once in a while, sometimes they're older, sometimes they're like Mrs. Duff. They just can't hear you, and they say, huh? So Mr. Turtle stuck his head out of his shell and said, huh? What are you saying? And Mrs. Bird said it again. My tree is getting eaten up! Well, then Mr. Turtle listened, and he said, oh, yes, it is. Well, I guess we need to talk about that. The wise old owl once told me when I was just a young turtle that these little insects that we call pests come along every once in a while, and they're called locusts, and they like to eat everything, and then they fly away. Don't worry, it will all grow back one day. Well, Mrs. Bird was not going to be able to live in a tree with no leaves. The wind would blow. Might have to find you a new home. Do you know somewhere else you might be able to go just for a while? So Mrs. Bird thought about it, and she knew that she really liked that grove of trees. So she went and took some of the things out of her nest, and she said goodbye to the squirrels, and she said goodbye to Mr. Turtle, and she said, I'll be back soon, but I'm going to go have to build my nest somewhere else for now. So she flew over to the tree, and she built a new nest in the grove of trees, and that summer she laid 5 brand new eggs in her nest. And when her baby birds were all grown up, she pushed them out on a limb, and they learned to fly. And the next summer, when she flew over to visit Mr. Turtle, she noticed that all the leaves had grown back out on her tree, and she could move back to her tree. And she was so excited. But for a while, just a while, Mrs. Bird had to live in a new tree, a different tree, a tree she had never lived in before. I think that's the end of my story. Now, have you ever had to do something you've never done before, boys and girls? I have. Yeah, I've never taught on TV before. But I have done something else with my students before. We have journaled before. We've used words like these words we've got up here. Bird, bee, worm, grass, egg, stick, squirrel, tree, that's right, turtle, pest, owl, nest, mice, and sun. And we've taken words like that, and we have journaled in our journal, and we've drawn pictures to go with our story. And I think someone came and stole my green marker out of here, so I'm going to have to use a yellow marker. I bet that leprechaun did. That leprechaun comes in our classroom and steals stuff, doesn't he? My boys and girls know. So we're going to draw a nice tree. You might not even have markers. You might not even have, I found one. You might not even have, look at that, I found a green marker. You might only have a pen that mom and dad have that they pay their bills with. You might only have some crayons that maybe you had to dig out of the bottom of your toy box and make a new box for yourself of things that you could use while you were having to do distance learning. But whatever you've got to draw with is fine. You might want to draw a tree. You might want to draw a bird. You might want to draw a nest. Whatever you draw is correct. And after you draw it, think about what words you could write about the story that we read. Now, I want to show you something that I didn't draw because really Mrs. Duff is not the best artist in the world. So once you've drawn your tree and everything, you might want to write some words like bird, or you might want to write a sentence with the first letter capital and the rest of it lowercase. And make sure you put punctuation at the end. However, wherever you are in your writing, that's what's correct for you. So draw me a picture about that. And if you want to, send it to your teacher, let them know that you did it with the story that we talked about today. Now, if you do that and you journal, that's pretty exciting. My grandson the other day was at my house, and he was talking about a rose. He was outside, and I think he saw some roses. I don't have any roses growing, so I don't know what he saw. But he decided that he was going to draw a picture of a rose. And it looks like he even put like a glass clock over the top of it. Or maybe it was a bottle. It was a bottle floating in an ocean. I think that was what it was. And he wrote, "The rose is floating." Now, all his words were not spelled exactly like I would spell them. He did phonetic spelling. That means he spelled it the way he heard it. Because he's a first grader. And he's pretty smart. And he's learning how to write. And he's learning how to spell words. So I loved that picture that Flynn drew me, so I wanted to share it with you today. Now, boys and girls, there are all kinds of stories out there that are about birds. We've got The Best Nest. There was an old lady who swallowed a chick. Click, clack, peep. You might enjoy some of those. There's also a story called Green Eggs and Ham, and it's about eggs. And it's about somebody having to try something new, kind of like that bird had to try something new. He didn't like those eggs in this story. So you might mention to your parents these stories that I told you and see if maybe they could find those somewhere for you to read. Maybe you have a library at your house. You might just have to find your books on the internet. You might have to make up your own stories, which is so much fun. I also have a set of eggs. Now, every year in class, we do life cycles. Life cycles are about when birds or birds and other animals reproduce and they have babies. Well, Mrs. Rader brought me these. Now, the eggs that I eat at my house this morning, I made an egg this morning and it was in a white shell, just plain old white shell, and it was in the fridge. Well, this is not an egg from my fridge. If you notice, this is a nice green egg. And inside this green egg is the same yellow yolk that I ate this morning and the same white albumin. But if I put these eggs in a nest with a bird and she sat on them for 21 days, they might hatch. I could dye these eggs for Easter because Easter's coming up. I could hide them. I could boil them and hide them. But I'm going to do something special with them. This afternoon, I'm going to set up my incubator and I'm going to put them in my incubator where they're nice and warm and they'll start to grow. And in 21 days, we'll have a special surprise. And I'll take some pictures so I can show that to you next week as they grow. And I'll look inside those eggs and maybe we'll get to see some chicks hatch. Chicks don't always hatch, but sometimes they do. Now, boys and girls, I'm excited that you got out your journals and I'm excited that you joined me today. Think about some other books that you might be able to read that are about animals and that are good stories that you enjoy. Remember, if you journal and you have things in your journal that you want to share with your teacher, have your mom or dad take a picture of it. Send it to your teacher. You could even if you know my Facebook page, you could even send it to me. You could send it to sequoiaheagles.net. Maybe there's some place we could send it to our teacher on there. I want you to remember, though, that we are all missing you. I want you to be careful outside. Now, today it's kind of cold, but it's not as cold as it's going to be this weekend. So you might want to go on a scavenger hunt and find some new things to do outside. Maybe look for baby birds or look for mama birds living in trees. If you find a nest, though, guess what I want you to do with it? Leave it where it's at, because a mama bird might be coming back to lay its eggs in that nest. Boys and girls, happy scavenging, happy looking. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you back next Thursday at the same time, same place with a whole new story. Have a good week. Goodbye. good.